We can do it next time.
I gotta fix that, sorry.
Want to just do it next time?
Well, I think we should table that item until the next meeting.
Okay, let's table the approval of the minutes for the last meeting until the next meeting. Do we have to actually make a motion to do that?
So that's the motion.
All right,
Yeah?
okay.
Okay.
I'll make a motion that we table the discussion of, and approval of the minutes for the last meeting until our next meeting, because we don't have it.
Second.
Excellent, all those in favor?
Aye.
Okay,
Reports. Well,
Yes.
there is no member of the public present.
no, Go ahead.
Reports would be next.
reports? What do you got for us?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The first thing I have to report is something quite obvious. The removal of Commissioner Forrest from the commission was accomplished by the City Council at the last meeting as you recommended. And there is an application for her vacant seat, and it is in the hands of the mayor. He's considering whether or not to recommend appointment. So that's actually pretty exciting. I think that's the first time in a long time we would have a full commission. The city got a new police officer, Officer Robert Thornburg. He came on board 1 September. He is a former Colorado State law enforcement officer, so he was known to Chief Swain by reputation when he got here, and now works for us. Miss Jenny Foglia-Jones, who's the Communications Marketing and Outreach Manager for the Port of Olympia, presented what she calls Foreign Trade Zones 101 to the council last meeting. That was a very interesting presentation. Basically, foreign trade zones are little areas that Congress created. There's a process to go about being designated a foreign trade zone, and it's like having a little piece of a foreign country in a port to facilitate commerce. And one of the requirements is if you want to take advantage of the foreign trade zone, there's tax advantages to it. There's also labor advantages to it. You can apply through the office at the Economic Development Council, and if you're accepted into the program, then you're eligible for these incentives, I guess is the right way to phrase them, to continue doing business. And there's really only a couple of requirements. One is that you have to be in the import-export business, which would cover the ag park out here, we think, because we're in the zone for the Port of Olympia. The Port of Olympia has one. And the other thing is very technical, legal. You have to have some financial wherewithal. And for this reason, they don't give you a lot of the nuts and bolts questions. What they tell you is, if you have a business that meets the import-export requirement, go talk to them and they'll ask you the very technical questions, and they'll make the determination on whether or not your business qualifies to be in the foreign trade zone, and if so, you save yourself some bucks doing it. So that was real interesting. We're interested in pursuing that for the ag part. We want to understand it better so that we can do a better job of talking to folks about it. At the last council meeting, they decided that today there would be a ribbon cutting ceremony for the new Veterans Memorial and Wall. So that was done this afternoon at 1:30. All 3 county commissioners were here. It wasn't a big event, but the purpose for it was we dedicated the Veterans Memorial last Veterans Day, but the wall was still under construction. Construction on it is now complete, and they wanted to give the county commissioners the opportunity to address folks, because by and large the counties who paid for that thing. The city contributed, you know, the county contributed 150,000 and we contributed about 30. So that was quite a bargain for us. The council again took your recommendation and passed a resolution accepting the YTT extension feasibility study, specifically commending it to the Tenino Planning Commission for your use when you decide to tackle comp plan updates. We are going to call the bicycle kiosk the bicycle plaza. The word kiosk implies a roof. That became a challenge for funding, so we had to name it something else. So the bike plaza is what we named it. We talked about, when I briefed you last, I talked to you about Thurston County's determination of non-significance for the generator. The public comment period for that proposal ended on September 16th. I'm not aware of anybody around here that made comment one way or the other, but you know, we're one little piece of the county. Any appeals that anybody wants to do, they have until September 23rd to do that. Our council member Godovac went to mediation with Timberland Regional Library. That mediation did not result in an agreement, and so that still leaves the city and the district at an impasse with respect to how much the city will pay to clean the library and do routine maintenance on it. I can't comment a whole lot because what happened at mediation is not supposed to be talked about, and the rest is highly speculative. All I can tell you at this point is, you know, we're trying to live up to the current agreement to the best of our ability to do so. The city council is looking at a lot of different ideas on how to raise revenue specifically for transportation. Really want to start focusing on street repairs this year and next. But as always, the biggest challenge is money. Edward Jones bought and donated a park bench for the farmers market. We're going to put it up on Olympia, on the west side of Olympia Avenue South. So Public Works will be doing that when they get the table. The council supports Thurston County Proposition 1, which is an initiative to increase sales and use taxes by 0.1% in support of a new emergency communication system. So they passed a resolution doing that. They approved the scope of work for the city engineer to do the architectural assessment at the Quarry House. That's in preparation for that building's renovation. All right, I told you about the clerk, court clerk that is. Chief Swain is hosting another Citizens Academy. They're currently recruiting for that. I don't have a start date. If you're interested, I can get you that information. They have room for 10 seats. It'll take 2 evenings a week for 10 weeks and a couple of Saturdays, but the Saturdays are fun days. The auditor's office visited us. We entertained them for about 2 weeks. My sense is that we will not receive any findings, which is the most significant, which are the worst thing to have. We will have a couple of repeat items in a management letter, which is something the city has to respond to, but it has no repercussions beyond that. And then, of course, exit comments. There's always stuff that we can do better. And that's pretty much the news from the city council. Questions?
Nice. Questions?
No public hearings, that takes us to unfinished business.
Yes, it does. So, Ag Park. What do you wanna do with that?
It's just updates, those are just items if they're.
Yeah, the Green Ribbon Advisory Panel's next meeting is on the 3rd of October, I believe.
Something.
Second? Yeah,
I think the second,
Yeah, second.
So at that meeting, the intent is to show a series of kind of guiding principles for the operational model for the governance, package to the Green Ribbon Advisory Panel, as well as a stab at a vision or mission statement for the park, and get feedback at that point.
Nothing new has happened since the last Green Ribbon there, I guess.
Work is proceeding on the water line extension design. The clerk can speak more in detail to what the city's engineer is doing on that front and what his time frame is, what the time frame is for the water line extension from, Hidden Meadows out towards the site.
So, here's what we know. Doug Bloom drew the city water to the midpoint of where the intersection to the entrance to Hidden Meadow and Highway 99 will be. And so the engineer is designing, picking that water line up and taking it as far east as money will allow. He knows our intent. The sewer only needs to be extended from the front of the plant to the west of the plant. I mean, because it's going that way. Tenino Telephone has been out and they have done their preliminary survey, so Tenino Telephone is going to jump in on our project and put fiber in the ground all the way to the plant. That's good for the plant, it's good for the site. So they'll have really high quality, high speed internet when the buildings go up.
What about reclaim the water from the June line? Are we gonna do that before people move in, or are we gonna wait till somebody wants it?
When I talk to the city engineer, they're going to build that design into the water line extension plans. So the reclaimed water line from the wastewater treatment plant into the park is, not too far, so he felt like it was just kind of a minimal cost increase to make that future connection possible.
That's consistent with, on the other side, Director Cannon had wanted us to investigate running a purple line this way to the park and the school district, and that's just economically infeasible.
With the money that we have right now,
Yeah, it's
ever.
just, it's, it would just cost too much money. There's a lot of constraints. According to the engineer, it's not just, so the first requirement is 10 feet of separation between a sewer pipe and a water supply line. They need another 10 feet for the purple line.
That has to be separated from the water line.
Yeah, it's got, so any way you look at it, you now need 30 feet on either side of the right of way. We're not gonna acquire more right of way. Taking it across Highway 99 is an option, and then down, but you're still faced with, astronomical construction costs. What he said, and what the mayor agreed with him is, if they had engineered the purple pipe to be laid at the time they were laying the collection system, that would have been an opportune time to do it. But since it wasn't done, it's going to be cost prohibitive. However, going west, it's a whole other ballgame. Anytime, we're just like the water line, anytime you open up the trench, that's an opportunity to extend it. So depending on how much development goes on out there. Lots of talk about, there are a number of things that you could do with reclaimed water at the ag park site to include using it to heat the facilities. You know, the sky's the limit.
Sure.
And it's supposed to be an innovation park anyway. So conceptually, you know, we'd all like to see that happen, but it's just about money.
Yeah.
Back onto the timeline, so the winter is never a good time to do construction. They could do it if they had to, but their thought is they don't have to, so they're not going to, and I don't blame them. He's still finishing the design, and then after the design has been completed, it's gotta be bid. You know, so there's a process that has to occur between now and then. And then what they think is a reasonable timeline to start construction is spring of 2020. So is that March, is it April? You know?
For the water line.
Yeah, water and
It does.
to get the water line out there and extend it. And
That pushes back the first building, or no?
Not really. I mean, I think, the pad wouldn't be built on until this spring at the earliest anyway. The sewer, he's doing the sewer line connection as well, but that's, you know, not much farther than this room. It's not very far to tap it in from next door. And when the design comes back with the length of the water line pipe, that'll also help us continue to plan out the interior workings in the pads of the site. Because I think, you know, right, when we costed it this spring, it was going to go from just east of Scatter Creek, underneath the creek in the sleeve that was set up when the city did the sewer line extension a couple of years ago. It's gonna go from there all the way to the northeast corner of the Ag Park site, and that was about as far as we could take with the $600,000 that we had. Because the developer has come in the meantime, and Doug Bloom's property in Meadows, he's done that part already, and that means we have that much more length to be able to potentially run along the face of, you know, the frontage of the property, and maybe even stub it into the property a little bit from the street. So that would be the design parameters. That'll give us a better handle on how to design the interior of the park. It's still gonna be that pad 1 and that kind of northeast corner, so that's the first spot.
Okay.
Long way around saying I don't think it'll slow anything really down.
Right, sounds like, yeah.
And just as another ag park update, you know, that 1.5 million that came from the legislature is not enough to really, it's enough to either build a building or do quite a bit of site improvements like storm drains and parking lot and curb gutter, sidewalk and frontage improvements and things like that, and maybe a shell of a building, but it's not enough to do both, right? And we need, you know, the original ask was for almost 3 million, you know, like 2.5 or whatever, right? And so we need another 800 to 1.2 million to really tilt up and have fully operational. Now, so that delta could be met by a tenant coming in and bringing their own dollars and then finish the build to suit. It might be met by a grant package from TransAlta. I mean, that's always been part of the discussion, or it could be a second appropriation out of the legislature. Or a big bake sale. You know, John and company selling stuff.
So Director Cannon and I were chatting today, and I briefed you previously on our desire to get going on septic receiving. He is working out the details to lease the equipment to flatten the hill behind the 2 reservoirs at the treatment site. There's a little hill back there with some equipment on it. So he's already moved the equipment. He wants to flatten the hill. He's made arrangements with the county to use one of their rock screens. So they're going to take the material that they're removing from the hill, screen it, separate the soil, and the smaller rock, he wants to keep. The larger rock, he's gonna send it in and have it crushed. So we're making a flat spot behind the two reservoirs in preparation for doing septage receiving. And we're creating some fill dirt for use by the city, and some small gravel for use by the city, and we will sell the big stones to a rock quarry, and then buy the smaller rock back, if that makes any sense.
Sure, is that like Miles sand and gravel or right next door? Or somebody else?
Well, I think the real deal is, we're gonna have to pay to have the rocks crushed. So, that's the thing. Selling them big rocks and buying smaller rocks. You can say it any way you want to. That's about all I have to offer on development.
All right. Is that it? Sign application? Oh, marijuana grow operation at your house?
So that's just a public interest story. Mr. Barnes issued a conditional occupation permit for the new marijuana processing facility here in town. The reason that it was conditioned on the fact that they have to finish the landscaping within 30 days. The building was good to go. Everything inside the fence was good to go, but they had a temporary facility there that they were using to actually do operations, and they have to move that before they can finish the landscaping. So we gave them 90 days to do that, and what they're doing with that 90 days is getting ready to go into operation. At full strength, they estimate they're going to have 32 employees, and those are living wage jobs here in town, so that's like the biggest job score in a couple of score years. It's huge. Where are those guys going to live? Well, they're going to live in the new Hidden Meadows development. Things are just happening like that.
That is good. Hanson duplex?
I don't know if I have anything to report on that.
What is that? Is that the one that we've been talking about behind on Lincoln? Or behind the hardware store? The old hardware store?
Yeah, that was a proposal to, I believe that, behind the hardware store, and we couldn't, I tried as best I could to make that work. There's just not enough property, and you can't access a unit from an alley as its official access. So the access would have had to be, I think, off of Lincoln, which is the frontage street. I think that's right. And the property owner wasn't interested in bringing a driveway along the fence line to access the property in the back. It's interesting. It's probably worth noting that this type of incremental development is kind of being seen all over the region, and Olympia has gone through a pretty painful process called the missing middle. So if you've been paying any attention to that, that's the missing middle is kind of a planner term, architecture term for there's single family homes that are detached, single family, and styles have varied from ranch style in the 50s to 2-story, 3-car garage styles now, but it's single family detached. And then you have large apartment complexes, kind of a garden style is what you see mostly now with pods of 2 to 3 stories, 6 to 8 units per building, and maybe 30 to 60 apartments within a development, and nothing in between. So you have houses and you have apartments, and you don't have anything else. And Tenino's already done a good job through its zoning code allowing for duplexes and triplexes and mother-in-law units, and something called ADUs, accessory dwelling units, which is converting a building on your property to a small rental. doesn't have to be a tiny house, but a lot of them are kind of that size, but it could just be a mother-in-law unit, that's also considered an ADU. There's standards that go along with that, but that missing middle of housing, Tenino's done a good job positioning itself to accommodate that, but there still are certain requirements for neighborhood continuity and, you know, public safety and fire and, you know, all the things that, all the reasons that zoning got put in place over 100 years ago to deal with, like tenement development in New York City in particular is kind of what drove a lot of zoning stuff, where people are just kind of living in squalor and, you know, not enough air and circulation and clean water and all that stuff. So there started to be, you know, zoning to separate the uses out, and planners and design professionals have recognized it's okay to integrate those a little bit more, and not have quite so distinctive cuts between the colors on the map. And that's why you start to see more mixed uses. And so, you know, caretaker units or shop owners living above their businesses. I mean, that's you know, generations and hundreds and thousands of years of that type of dwelling style. You know, farmers didn't live in town and then have a farm out, you know, in the country. They lived on the farm, and so that's becoming a lot more common. But there still are some, you know, some standards that you have to keep up. And again, she could have done what they wanted to do. She chose not to because of the impact it was going to have on the primary dwelling.
Okay. So that was the Hanson duplex lot. What about commercial development and signed application for 599 Sussex?
So that's the, I think that's Time Machine building.
Okay.
And there's a proposal to have a auto, like a vehicle enhancement, I guess you could say, kind of a garage-based, soup up the muffler. I'm not a car guy, so you have to forgive me, but, you know, making enhancements to vehicles
Behind it?
inside that building.
Oh, the one down here.
Mhm.
The old time machine.
Yeah.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, so the sign permit was to swap the base of the sign out and put a new sign on, so
Okay.
that type of, the sign codes justify, I mean, it's right the way that it's set up, to allow for a reface of an existing sign, without, exhaustive permits. So, you know, new businesses come in, obviously they have a new name, they're gonna swap that out. It's pretty straightforward, as long as the building official is okay with the condition of the existing sign. What we're careful about is, you know, new projections into the right of way, or a sign that isn't obviously safe, they'll ask them to update it. Lighting is kind of one of those things. Sign codes are really not my favorite thing to do. Our company gets asked to do sign code rewrites, and that's like a, oh, thank you.
Try to avoid that.
Oh yeah, because nobody's happy with what happens. The business owners are displeased with what they see as overbearing regulations, and then, you know, the users in the community are frustrated with the design choices that business members sometimes make. So, but we do regulate things like, you know, pole signs and fluttering flags and other things that are potentially safety distraction. All that stuff's in there. Temporary signs, A-frame signs. There's a reason all these codes are set up. I was pulling out of a place yesterday where I couldn't even see around the corner because there was an A-frame in the way. Those types of things. You know, there's reasons that there's codes like that.
Okay, we talked about the generator, Park Avenue subdivision.
Yeah, so without getting into too many details, because a lot of the times, until someone applies, it's just a, you know, speculation. But there is some development activity out that way. There's some vacant lots that have been on the market. I've had a lot of phone calls on real estate inquiries.
Like Frank Anderson's old place.
That sounds right. I mean, I don't know who.
Like Washington's, the undeveloped Washington Street between Reynolds and whatever that street is.
Yeah, so there's a handful of parcels that back up against the park property. Not Park Avenue, but actual park property, you know.
Oh, you mean the Creekside Foundations?
Yeah,
The
so
trail.
there's some stuff in there, and then there's one that kind of where you're referencing Reynolds and
Oh.
Park, and there's a few lots in there where you can see some gaps where maybe it used to be somebody's big backyard, and now there's some development pressure. So there's people interested in using this segmentation rule that the city had changed when lots were combined for tax purposes. You can break them back out. We did that, I don't know, a couple meetings ago in March or April. They're looking at that, so I would expect to see either a combination of some boundary line adjustments, which means moving lot lines around, so if it's, that's what that means. I can walk through it if you have questions, but boundary line adjustments, short plat, which is a subdivision, dividing property up to 4 lots, or a large subdivision, or a subdivision is more than 4. That's kind of how the development code breaks those out. And in the state of Washington, for the most part, 4 lots, a 4-lot short plat doesn't have to meet the same standards from a development perspective as more than 4, because the state has, and not just Washington, many states recognize that someone who's doing a short plat is probably not a big-time developer. They're just somebody who's got a little bit of land, who's trying to add a few houses, next to them, or subdivide the back half of the property and put my grandmother's house on it or whatever. So it's a lot more lenient as far as the requests for public infrastructure, and most of the time the impact fees are still paid because those are on a unit by unit basis. But it's going to be a combination of it. It depends on what the people looking at the properties want to do, whether they want to do 4 or 8 or 9 or whatever.
So, with this, like talking about the Washington Street that's not actually there between the Reynolds and that other street. If somebody wanted to develop that, would the city, how would Washington Street be developed? Would the city just have to do that, or how would that work? Do you have any idea? I'm just curious.
I told the potential purchaser that they needed to call the Public Works Director to ask about that piece. Cities need to make sure that the requests that they have of a developer matches up with the impact of that development. That's kind of a fundamental land use premise that has been, the US Supreme Court has ruled on. It's called, nexus and proportionality. And those things mean, you're building 2 houses, we can't make you build an interstate, right? That's not fair. You're causing 3 to 6 trips a day per unit, whatever the number is. That doesn't justify $1 billion. That's an obscene example, obviously, but that's the premise of proportionality. That if you're doing a 4-lot short plat, you probably aren't going to be required to build a whole brand new road. You may need to improve your half of the road on your frontage up to the center line. That's not super uncommon, depending on the length of your frontage. If it's 4,000 feet, that might be too much, right?
Would the city be compelled to build the road then? In some way, if they wanted to develop
most of the time that doesn't happen, but again, I don't want to speak too hypothetically about it without looking at the code and talking to Troy and seeing what his thoughts are. Sometimes jurisdictions will ask the developer to contribute fee in lieu of, and so give us a certain amount of money and we will make the improvements when we have the money, and until such time it won't be a public street, it will be your driveway for your development, and it'll be
I see.
upgraded to a certain standard that it's kind of a driveway standard, and then we will take the money that you contributed fee in lieu of making the improvements, and we'll make the improvements to the whole street.
I see.
Because otherwise you get these little sidewalks to nowhere, right? You'll have 300 feet of sidewalk and then nothing else at all, and there's a couple different positions on that. I mean, if you do enough of those sidewalks to nowhere, then all you have left is a little gap and the city comes in and paves the gap and you're good to go, right? Or you just contribute to the city and don't put a sidewalk in, and then you don't have any improvements until you have all of them, right? Until all of a sudden the city comes in and goes boom and draws them, but that may be 8 years out, maybe 10 years out, and so what's the utility, or what's the benefit in the meantime? It's kind of a judgment call.
Alright. Interesting.
Yeah. But the developers I'm talking to are experienced and have local, they understand the local market, so that they recognize the demand for new residences.
Well, I think that's all we have on the agenda.
So I'd like to suggest, or I'm gonna pass something out and then ask for your input. At the last meeting, we talked a little bit about the short course
Yep.
that the Department of Commerce is putting on
Tomorrow?
in the fine town of Winlock tomorrow. It sounds like at least one planning commissioner is going to be there. I don't know if you're gonna be there or not, but I've taken the liberty of copying the title page and the table of contents for the binder that they usually hand out of these things. It's a pretty recent, compared to what the state can put out, it's a pretty recent resource guide. And so what I'd like to do is use this table of contents as a outline for things that we could talk about in training sessions during your meetings. Everybody's busy. Saturdays and Sundays are sacrosanct as well as evenings, so I'm not suggesting we do our own short course in 3-hour increments, and that's laborious, but I'm thinking maybe 15 to 45-minute chunks where we address topics of your interest, and we can kind of program them through the rest of the year, and you can do it on a monthly basis, we can do it on a quarterly basis, but we need to get the commission to a level of comfort with planning issues before we start diving into the binder in front of you, which is the comp plan. And because we've got 2 very new members, 1 vacant seat, so that'll be a 3rd new member, and then you and Commissioner Mounds have got a lot of experience, or you've been to a few of these things before, so.
Sure.
But this stuff is constantly, a moving target, so that would be a suggestion I would have, is that we could either do it in this setting here. I think if we're gonna actually do Q&A and converse on planning issues and go through the comp plan, we could probably do it at the tables. That would be a little more conversational and less, preachy or whatever. But that's my thought for to raise the level of awareness of the issues and the availabilities and the opportunities that are out there in plannings and within the structure of GMA, SEPA, and shorelines and all the other stuff. And then let's have a conversation about your comp plan and start jumping into areas that you think are groovy, and maybe areas you think are not so groovy, and start talking about building community. Like what things you see, what targets you see for opportunity, what areas, again, this like incremental development with missing middle and duplexes and triplexes, and how do we get that? How do we keep our community cohesiveness and our identity, but still grow in a way that is right for us, and all those fun things. What do you think about that?
Yeah, sounds good to me. So, were you thinking that we would do that after the meeting, like in the meeting and then meet over there? Or would that be part of the meeting?
Either way, I think you probably could call it a work session. I think if you were having a meeting of the majority of the members, it still has to be advertised, right? Obviously, you'll learn about that tomorrow, with just the Open Public Meetings Act, so, you know, you could do it either way. I'd defer to John about how he thinks it would best serve. I mean, you could have a section of your meeting open to the public, would it just be like, you know, commission, you know, GMA training, and call it that on the agenda, and, you know, we could identify which pieces you wanna talk about each month, and we open it up to the public, and the idea being that I prepare ahead of time and give you kind of some ideas, and then we talk through some stuff.
Okay. I think it makes sense to do it every month, like quarterly, it doesn't seem like often enough to get anywhere, really, but what do you guys think?
I agree with that.
Yeah, I think monthly would be wonderful.
Sure.
Okay?
Alright, well, shall we move to the table, or not yet?
Yeah, I prefer that, so here's what I'm thinking, we've got the table of contents, and you have a comp plan. And let's sit down, maybe the first time you've seen the comp plan in hard format, unless you printed it out on your own. I've got one back at our office, but I mostly look at it online. And most everything that's in your short course resource guide is in the comp plan in a Tenino form. But, I don't know, maybe we spend whatever you guys want to spend this evening charting out kind of right now what you think you would like to talk through based on, you know, glancing at the comp plan and glancing at the table of contents.
Ready?
That's my pitch.
Sounds good.
Oh, okay.
So I think to answer Dan's concern about structurally, you all adopted your own set of rules. So you're not, you know, and I'm not versed in them, I'm versed in Robert's. What the council has done is they've said the first portion of our city council meeting is always going to be a working session where no business is conducted. Well, what does that mean? It means we have an agenda to guide us, but it's more like this. It's a time where all the council members together can study an issue, and it's, you know, it's not as rigorous an environment, it's not as formal an environment. And what we've discovered is when we do that, and we talk about the issues, and then after the work session is over, we roll into the business meeting, and in the business meeting, as those agenda items come up, decisions just come like this, because they've already chewed it out, and they had the opportunity to talk back and forth. And during a meeting, when you're operating under rules of procedure, it's not a time to have the discussion with the public. But if you have that whole time dedicated beforehand, the public can be involved in it as well. I mean, it's, again, you know, it's how you guys want to conduct your business. So I would just offer that, that's a technique that we've found very successful in the council.
What do you think?
That sounds good to me. I mean,
Yeah.
you want to do it first or second?
You guys wanna do it before we start the
I mean, I
formal meeting, or after?
I think before would make sense, especially if there are certain issues that we know are coming up. That's a great time to really dive into them, talk about them.
Makes sense to me?
The only caution I would have is if someone in the public is here to hear you deliberate on their
Specific
item
issue.
that is a public hearing based, you know, like a special use permit, conditional use permit, whatever, and then they have to sit through however many minutes of this, that might not be their best, so I mean, you could always suspend, you know, or move things around on the agenda for those items.
We do that, you know, if somebody's on you know, somebody took the time to come here and they're on some kind of tight timeline, you can vote to amend your agenda on the fly and move things around.
Sure. So big cities, the way they do it, is they have work session and then a regular meeting, and then a work session and then a regular meeting. So the work session is all like round table like this, staff sits there, they say, we wanna bring this issue before you, people have barking dogs and, mean pit bulls, and we wanna, institute a dangerous dog policy, and so then they chat about it, council can say, well, what other cities doing, and it's an area where they, council can, or planning commission can push staff and say, can you research this, what are you thinking about this, how do you think you can do this, and then staff goes away, puts it all together, and then brings it back in a regular meeting, says, here's our proposal, here's what a draft ordinance, and that's when the deliberation happens in a public, in an official setting, and then they can amend it or whatever. But otherwise, if everything's always done in a full-on like televised setting, it just gets it's pretty clunky. So because we're only meeting once a month, and your council meets twice, but they're all business meetings. So
Well,
the second
again,
part,
depending on, they say that there's always a work session, but the work session might be, only just a few minutes. And it's kind of it's as much art as it is science. But by the Friday before their Tuesday meeting, we have a pretty good sense of, hey, we'll call everybody. Don't come at 6:30, come at 7, because that's all the work session is going to take. In your case, however you want to do it. I suspect that for some period of time, in the near term, defined as like 90 to 120 days, your agendas will look more like 45 minutes of work session and 15 minutes of business meeting. And then,
yeah.
Always hard to predict the future, but there are certain things that we know are going to occur here this spring that will cause, activity in the planning area. And so that schedule might change. You might do half and half, or you might decide not to have, or do a complete business meeting. Again, you guys are the master of it. You tell Dan and I what, how you want to roll with it.
So for example, the legislature passed a bill called 1923. It's a gross Senate substitute bill 1923, and it's all about housing. And it offers up grant funds through the Department of Commerce to cities in two groups, cities smaller than 20 grand and cities more than 20 grand. And the cities more than 20 grand get to go first, and Commerce said whatever money's left over gets to go to the cities of under 20 grand. So we'll see how that goes. But they've got some standards in there. The legislature and Commerce put together some standards about how they're going to go award this money. And some of those things Tenino has already done, and some of those things Tenino wouldn't do, and some of those things they may do. But until we have like a discussion about it, until I kind of know where you guys are at and how comfortable you with, it's just way premature for us to, staff to bring in an ordinance forward, a resolution forward, and say here's what we're going to do to try to chase this money. Like a housing action plan, that's one of the big things. Well, you have to pay for a housing action plan, so we don't have one, so that's off the list. One of them is provide duplexes and triplexes and ADUs in zones. Well, we've already done that. So another criteria is if you have a transit-oriented center or a bus or a light rail, you can upzone those types of things or allow heavy density around those types of things. Well, that's not an issue. So there's a whole host of things that if we had a greater if I had better insight on where you were at, I'd have a better handle on what to bring you and how to talk about that thing. And then conversely, if you felt more comfortable with planning issues, and we're aware of some of the stuff that's going on out there, then you might bring something to us and say, can we talk about something?
Okay.
So what I hear you saying is, do it first, do it monthly, and if we need to take a break, we'll take a break.
It's pretty rare that somebody comes in and wants to talk about something at this point. Maybe that'll change, but let's do it at the beginning.
So for me, how about let's try to keep them to, we'll see how they go. I think a dialogue is better than, a lecture. And as long as we graph it out and we know where we're gonna be at, I'll try to send you stuff, either during the time frame between the meetings or at least a week in advance, so you can kind of do a little, I don't expect you to do homework, but at least you can get some familiarity with it, and then we can come back and you can have a discussion. We'll just have, questions we'll do with that.
Correct.
So we'll just do kind of a crash course, is kind of what John and I were talking about. Because I hope you're able to go tomorrow to the short course. You're going, and I hope you bring a lot of good stuff back, but it's gonna be a lot of information in 3 hours, and so I think this is a good way to go about it. So with that, they break these into how many chapters? 12 chapters. Legal and practical objectives of planning. We should probably talk a little bit about that. I think that's mostly what they're gonna hit tomorrow. Right, I mean, that's been your experience, because they wanna make sure that planning commissioners don't screw it up, don't make big mistakes. So they'll talk about that, and then citizen participation in public process. We'll talk about that a little bit, especially the open public meetings. And so I'd rather not cover those two.
I agree.
Okay. I think we could talk a little bit about the statutory basis for planning in the Growth Management Act, and I could probably do that in 90 seconds. We would basically say this is the law of the land. It's been this way since 1991 and 1992. In our county, the county is in charge of TRPC in particular, Thurston Regional Planning Council, which is the regional.
Metropolitan Planning Organization.
Yeah, the MPO that is in charge of pass-through for federal transportation dollars and some other types of federal funds, depending on what they apply for. They're in charge of figuring out with the Office of Financial Management how fast and how much the county's gonna grow. And the growth is really, they look at growth in two ways: employment and housing, right? And TRPC works with the county itself and the cities within the county, including to 902. It's really a negotiation process to determine who gets what growth, both on the employment side and housing side. And so then that's how the state does it. So the state agency estimates the growth. So all these demographers are looking at death rates and migration rates and household sizes and all these other things, these inputs, and you've seen that. I think a couple meetings ago we had a population projection, right? And so OFM says, TRPC, here's your ranges. We think your Thurston County is going to go from 274 to 450 or something in there in the next 20 years, and figure it out and allocate the population across your cities. So that's in 90 seconds is kind of what GMA says. It pushes the planning to the county levels. If you grow at a certain rate, which all the Puget Sound counties are GMA counties now, and says counties and cities, you got to figure out your growth and you got to draw a line, right? And you say urban here, cities here, rural here, county there. That's kind of the oversimplification of it. Would you say that's kind of fair?
That sounds good. Doesn't always seem like it gets followed that well.
Right. So that's the rest of those, Planning Enabling Act, that happened before GMA. Shoreline Management Act also happened before GMA. That's environmental stuff. Subdivision Act also happened before GMA. SEPA also happened before GMA. So those are all things that, see, they only spend 9 pages on it, so it's need to know, but it's not super critical to what I think community building, kind of what I think you would be interested in here on a regular basis. Same thing with citizen participation. I think my company is very focused on citizen participation, and we try to get lots of it early. I think that's kind of the rule is lot of input at the earliest possible stages, and be transparent with what you're planning on doing, and be transparent with your decision making and your methodology. And there's certain deadlines that need to be met, with any of these permits, and so that stuff is all also laid out. John's pretty well versed on all that. This is the type of stuff that happens across, not just GMA, but across, Washington government. These are not just growth management provisions. So then the next page, chapters 3 through whatever else are really up to where, where you would like, where you're curious about. I kind of just hit on the first 3 or 4 of that chapter 3 stuff, like that we must plan and all that stuff, but I'd be curious how much, do you remember how much they hit this in the short course?
Not much, I don't think.
It's mostly OPM, it's mostly a Open Public Meetings Act, and then like why we have to do this, right?
Yeah, it's pretty.
Why GMA? What is GMA, and then how does SEPA play into that, and how does SMA?
Just gives me
all that
kind
stuff.
of an idea, it doesn't really go that much depth in some of
So,
the-
cause what I'd like to do is I'd like to get you squared away on how the mechanics of this stuff works, so that we can be smart about how to position Tenino and grow Tenino in a way that, again, is respective of your development patterns and, brings jobs and people here.
Should we just start with the growth management act?
You wanna just do that next month, so that'd be
Sure.
October?
Just move through it. Unless you guys have something specific that you wanna look at first, but.
So it looks like on this outline, and I downloaded the whole manual, and maybe I might use that as kind of our starting point, and then I might feed you a few other like little tidbits of stuff, during the interim between this meeting and the October meeting, but it looks like it's got kind of a, what does GMA ask you from you, and then how do we do project review, like letter G, that integrated project review. So, Alex, have you gone through permits before, for your buildings and stuff like that?
Yeah, residential,
Okay.
yep.
So, but you know a little bit about, people talking about SEPA, and there's a, hey, have you filled out your SEPA checklist or that kind of stuff?
Sure, yeah, a little bit.
Okay. So it might make sense to spend some time on SEPA, the
Sure.
SEPA checklist itself. Cause that is a fundamental part of almost every submittal that comes through the door. If you're building a single family house, you're exempt from SEPA. You don't have to fill out the checklist. If you're building a duplex, you have to fill out the checklist. If you're short planning, you don't have to fill out a checklist. But, unless you have a wetland or another critical areas back behind you, then now you have SEPA to go through critical area review. So I would suggest maybe breaking this chapter 3 up, or this, the growth management act, and into maybe two sets. Because if we bite off too much, we won't have any dialogue, it'll just be me yapping.
Okay.
I don't wanna do.
So you thinking the first part would be kind of like A through F, and then we go into the integrated project review, or?
Probably, that's
Yeah.
probably a good break. Growth management hearing board is, I'll try to speak about them without derision, that'll be a challenge for me.
So it's for October.
Yeah. Do we meet in December? Is that
Yeah.
every month, okay?
Don't have any official months off.
Got it. We don't, I don't know, other than chapter 3, the other pieces in here, I think you can jump around. There doesn't have to be, so it looks like chapter 6 is also SEPA. And EIS is another
Should we
ghastly beast like that.
include chapter 6 with a discussion of SEPA
Sure, we can do
in
that.
chapter 3?
I'll just stick to letter A though, 6A. We can
Okay.
stay away from water protection, for now, or maybe, we'll do GMA, kind of like a GMA prep in October, SEPA in November.
Okay.
That seems pretty
I like that.
fair.
Yeah. I've done some NEPA environmental assessments, and I've read through plenty of SEPAs, but not actually done them, but I think the laws are more or less the same that they're complying with. Might be able to help a little bit.
Yeah, we should probably do some type of like, I guess we'll probably get to terms and definitions and acronyms as we go through stuff, but NEPA is the national version, the National Environmental Policy Act, and SEPA is the State Environmental Protection. So, a little bit different with their State Environmental Policy Act, but NEPA is the National Environmental Protection Act, and then this is the Policy Act. We probably wouldn't need to do too much NEPA. I don't think discussion about NEPA, other than NEPA's triggered like.
You're using federal dollars to do something?
Yeah, federal dollars to do something, or sometimes if you trigger a species, you know, like pocket gopher, for example, you may have to.
Or if you were dealing with the Corps of Engineers on trying to build a road to a wetland or something like that, maybe.
Yeah, if it's a jurisdictional wetland, right? If it's big enough body, you might pull your NEPA stuff too. Wetlands are really, I don't know, maybe you should talk about that one. And talk about, wetlands are really complicated because of the way that the Corps interprets some of the wetland laws about having hydrology that's connected to navigable waters. I mean, that's kind of that's what happens. It's kind of, what is maybe more interesting is what's emerging with fish passage and culvert replacements. Because the tribes sued the state and said, you are damaging our fish runs with your
Undersized
undersized culverts, you know, you got this big of a culvert underneath the road, and fish can't get through it.
Sure.
So then the Supreme Court said as part of the treaties recently signed, that you gotta go back and replace these culverts and turn them in, let the fish swim back underneath.
Causes a lot of problems.
It does.
Degradation of land, also on the upgradient side of the small culvert. Like a lot of places you'll see, like between Raymond and Tokeland is an example, but there's like wetlands all along the upstream side of the highway that they built, and there's a lot of undersized culverts, and so the whole area on the west or on the north side of 105 is a wetland basically.
Because of the undersized.
There's nowhere for the water
yeah.
to go.
Right,
Yeah.
it's backed up.
And so not only can't fish get up in there, but, it's kind of creating more wetland in kind of a way. Which requires, Clean Water Act permits, and it's really difficult to do anything with it, which is why.
Yeah. So we probably should at some point, pull out of the abstract of the SEPA checklist and the SEPA process and talk maybe more specific, concept around that wetland and kind of critical
I
area.
don't do wetlands, but I'm familiar with.
Yeah, I got someone in our office who's a great teacher, who could come and spend half an hour talking about wetlands, so we should maybe do a wetland day. Because you've got the floodplains and the wetlands on the north end of town here that's kind of limiting your development. And then that way, there's, you get Scatter Creek and then all the associated floodplains and wetlands and down Scoop Chuck.
Going that way as well.
Yeah. So you're kind of hemmed in until you clear the bridge and get past like Hidden Meadows and kind of start heading past Mount Acres and toward the Ag Park and all that other.
You got a whole new.
You got a whole new series of things, yeah. But I'm thinking just like enough to kind of know why things are happening the way they're happening, is probably what we can expect.
That would be helpful.
So, if SEPA is November, and I'm thinking more like the SEPA checklist and like sort of discussion about what SEPA does, and then a practical application of that, which is, let me show you a SEPA checklist for a typical, maybe I'll pull the Hidden Meadows one, and we'll just look at that.
Perfect.
Is that not, that's a bad example, John? There's oak trees, is that the one we wanna be careful of? Or,
Around here, yeah, the Oregon white oak.
The white oak, yeah.
yeah.
Well, that would be a good example, because they had to deal with those oak tree
Yeah,
issues.
oak trees and floodplain slash wetland
Little
issues.
bit of floodplain stuff. People were pretty upset about.
Right.
So there was an interesting discussion about stormwater management as part of that too.
Right.
'Cause people who didn't want it were very worried that, basically, folks that lived on Lima Acres were worried that runoff from this development would cause more flooding where they live, in Scatter Creek. There was some interesting stuff in that one.
Yeah, so we could look at that, and then that way you have an idea of when stuff comes in the door with an application packet and you're being asked to approve a subdivision, you can kind of work with staff, you know, I would be making a recommendation on that, but you've got your own set of filters that you're looking at and say, hey, I remember this one time that it looked like this, and how come this, checklist doesn't say anything about that? How come it doesn't say anything about your stormwater management?
Perfect.
Um, All right. What else? What's enticing on this list? And all of these topics, are much deeper than the 1 page or 2 page that, this short course allows. So if you had a deep interest in vested rights, or a deep interest in what a LID and an economic development corporation would be, for example, we could spend 20 minutes talking about that. As long as we've got that programmed out, give me a few weeks to decide that stuff, we can bring it back.
Would it be worthwhile to tack on like annexation procedures with the Growth Management Act stuff, or?
I think you're probably where you wanna be as far as if we're trying to keep it to, 20 to 40 minutes with a
Right.
little bit of, I don't know how long we spent here already, maybe 20 minutes, so.
Yeah, okay. But that's-
I think, smaller pieces with a little bit of discussion, some Q&A and come back and hit it again. I mean, it's gonna take a while.
Okay.
I mean, just look at, this is what's impressive to me. This is a short course on local planning, right? And so the booklet has at least 294 pages on it. And this is supposed to be the booklet is the basis of a 3-hour class.
The 3-hour class really only gets, I think, to chapter 1 and part of chapter 2.
Well, you guys are right. I mean, they do the open public, they do the Growth Management Act piece, and that leads into the Open Public Meeting Act piece, that leads into the Public Record Acts piece, and you're done.
And so there's other training that happens across the state, not just the short course, but, AWC offers lots of planning classes at their conferences, and, there's other opportunities around the state. So that's why I'm suggesting, let's talk about the stuff that's important to Nino, and let's not spend time on substantive due process and, the vagueness inquiry, if you don't wanna do that. If you wanna talk instead about, infill development for small towns and cities, you wanna talk about, local examples of planning for infill development. So here, 12E, examples of infill developments in the Woodland District, that was some of my work. That was work that SCJ did, that I did something called a form-based code on in Lacey. Talking about proportional thresholds for redevelopment and at what point a developer would be required to redo the street. If you got an existing building and they wanna convert it, a lot of times what's happening is they don't wanna spend all this money converting this building, and they get tapped for another $1 million worth of frontage improvements. And the city would rather see the building redeveloped and then figure out the road. So there's thresholds there where, you know, if you stay under a certain threshold for the redevelopment costs, you don't run into trigger frontage improvements. Kinda like the short plat stuff I was talking about earlier.
That one looked interesting to me, and 11.
Yeah, 11, the sustainability and livability.
Were you involved on the sustainable Thurston approach?
Am I
Or
involved?
were you like last year and the year before?
I mean, I get involved with things like that on the periphery, you know, organizing, scheduling, providing information.
Did Katrina talk at all to the planning commission about it last year?
Not much.
Cause that was TRPC's work.
No, I don't think so.
Cause that's the other thing is if you wanted to, we could have someone from TRPC come and brief and give you, you know, 15 to 20 minutes worth of, you know,
That's a great idea.
what that means. Cause
Just lectures or.
I'd rather not do that one if you got the, you know, the experts 20 minutes down the road.
Sure.
You know, and that way
Yeah, they'll do it.
give you a sense of what you're thinking and how to take. So some of the things coming up, like the Shoreline Management Act, Tenino needs to look at its code and figure out how to make sure it's regulating shorelines correctly. Shorelines, I know there's not any lakes, but if a creek or a river is moving fast enough, it's considered a shoreline of the state.
Fair Creek counts, right?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
So, when do we have to update that? Is that not for a while?
I would say 2 years.
Yeah, so,
And
not a big priority.
right, it can take, you know, 6 to 12
Oh, the
months to
shoreline
update.
management plan.
Okay.
We have a plan.
The city does.
And we have
And
to update it.
In short, what it does is
Make
it
sure it's
gives
still
designations, it's
doing
like a
what it's
zoning
supposed to do.
code for shorelines.
Okay.
So it's like a zoning code for shorelines where you designate different portions of different reaches of a shoreline. You know, maybe a conservancy because you don't want anybody to touch it versus urban, which is, it's okay to put a dock and a, you know, a boat lift and, you know, a bulkhead because everybody's using it that way.
Okay.
Those are the two extremes. So it's less critical for you other than Scatter Creek, and you may have, you know, maybe the creek on the north end of town might, I don't know if that, I guess that's Scatter Creek coming through there.
And so that's just, so that plan just deals with Scatter Creek within the city limits? Is that, yep.
Yes.
So
But
that's
the county
our
has a
portion
shoreline plan for the whole county, and so.
that
when
takes
Scatter Creek-
over when our jurisdiction ends. Okay.
Yep, and so like, that's not as, complex as like a marine shoreline. So like in Olympia, you have marine shoreline that the tides go like this,
Totally.
you know, changes like buffers. There's a question about where's, what's called ordinary high water mark or, ordinary mean. How do you determine where that's at if the level of the ocean is constantly going like this, right?
Sure.
How do you decide where the setback starts, where your benchmark is, and then coordination between City of Olympia and the county, and that's the property line, and Olympia says conservancy and the county says residential.
Right.
And so this guy over here, you're building whatever, almost whatever you want within certain limitations, and you're looking at daisies.
And they're right next to each other, right?
Right, so how does that work? And so then that ends up, this person ends up suing that person or that jurisdiction because it's like what they can do. So, that's just kind of all the, you know, the stuff. So I heard chapter 11, something in, you know, a regional approach on sustainable Thurston, so ask TRPC for a brief. When is that meeting? Does someone have their calendar open, that December meeting, John?
Our December meeting?
Yeah, for planning commission,
Hang on a second.
cause it's early, it'd be like the.
Looks like the 10th.
Yeah,
Yeah, the 10th of December.
so maybe I'll have maybe we'll have Paul or Mark Daly or Katrina or whoever's in charge of it over there.
Pretty well versed in it.
So that'll be good, so you've got kind of two technical ones with the Q&A and a dialogue, and then one more of a presentation and a Q&A from TRPC. And we'll fit them in whenever we can if it's not December 10th. What else jumps out?
So here's just a question, so the county tribal planning issues, is that something that really doesn't affect us here? Do we have any tribal interaction within Tenino?
You have to ask tribes for comment on CEPAs, right?
Yeah, for SEPA and other
And also
other
NEPA stuff.
cultural resource, you know, if you're doing site development work and you're using state money, you have to ask them for input.
Okay.
It's basically a letter where you explain what you're doing, what you're planning on doing, and they'll say, we don't anticipate any impact to cultural resources.
Oh,
However,
It's
if you-
usually, but not always.
they'll say something like, however, if you find something,
Yeah, if you find
stop right
it,
away.
they always
call
say
us.
that, yeah. That's true of any, like, historical stuff too, though.
Yeah. Actually, that's an interesting point. How come there's no historic preservation on here?
That is kind of weird.
Cause our comp plan deals a lot with historic preservation. As
Our whole
needed.
town is, yeah.
So we should probably
Add it.
talk about that.
Well, that was one of the things I learned when I was reading through some of the information about, you know, the museum, the regulations for just downtown, if you wanna build a new structure, it has to, you know, incorporate sandstone, you know, or certain things to really tie it together. So historical preservation, I'd be interested in that.
Well,
You ever,
you know, historical preservation. Two different sets of rules, federal rules and state rules, right? I don't know the state rules so well, but the federal rules are actually pretty easy. This building's on the federal register, right? So if we wanna renovate it, renovate it. And the guidelines are the guidelines established by the Secretary of the Interior, and what those guidelines say is, do everything that you can to remain faithful to the original architecture, you know, writ large. The design, the materials, the techniques and all that. But where you can't, then do the best you can. But by all means, fix what needs to be fixed.
Sure.
You know, and it's amazing the people that are just scared to death to approach, touching a historic building.
yeah, so I agree with you on the national side. The state side is where it can get more
A little sticky.
restrictive. So, and
It's like any building, 40 years, is it 40 years?
it's 45, I think.
45.
I think it's anything older than 45 can be eligible for designation, and it has to go through a listing process, just like the Fed side. But the Fed side's looking for things of federal importance or typical of a style, versus the state side's got a different threshold, right? It's kind of,
I think so, yeah.
yeah, so, and that might be something for, and I think this is actually a pretty good topic. Maybe to have someone from DAHP come and just talk about, how they look at historic districts in the state, especially in cities.
DAHP is
Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation, but it's the archaeology with the ARAEO, whatever, you know, it's the funny spelling, archaeology.
Yeah.
They also do cultural resources, so, I did a project about 4 years ago at the Tumwater Brewery, you know, the big,
Oh, yeah.
beautiful building that's down at the
The old one?
basin.
At the river.
At the river, and that Tumwater wanted to, rehab, and they ended up buying it for like $10, cause it was overhanded bid to them, but, it's more of a liability than it is a
Right.
benefit right now, and it's gonna take a lot of money to fix, but the tribes were really concerned about that development because it's right down where the Chutes River pops into the estuary there, the old estuary, that's where before the, you know, the interstate was built, the whole estuary, before the dam and everything else was built, the estuary was rolled out.
Capital Lake and everything.
Yeah, and it was like a traditional gathering spot where, you know, the fish were trying to swim up those falls, and so they're just netting them out of there, and so there's shards of stuff everywhere, you know, and so that was a big deal. And so there's this huge discovery plan for what happens when you take a shovel and, you know, dig, you've gotta have a specialist there that's, you know, just paying attention, so that if you hit something that you shouldn't, or that, if you hit something that you didn't anticipate,
You have to develop a whole plan.
then you've got
around
in yours,
what you're
then you know how to protect it, and some of that came out of something you might just wanna write down for kicks and giggles, called the Executive Order 0505, which back in Christine Gregoire's administration, WashDOT was building a bridge or ferry terminal, I can't remember which one now, I'm gonna mess this up, but they didn't do enough cultural resources and they uncovered a burial site. So that project, stopped.
Immediately, yeah.
Immediately, and was a big, debacle for the state because the tribes were pissed. Right, and so then the governor wrote this thing that says, you shall, from now on, for all projects, consult with the tribe. And that's when you're basically asking them, hey, do you think there might be anything that you value over in this area? And then most of the time they say no, but like on the Tumwater site, they're like, oh yeah, definitely, right? And so it was multiple tribes, it was the Squaxin Island tribe, and it was also the Squally tribe.
I did a project on Martin Way, a NEPA assessment, and yeah, we did the Squaxin, the Squally, and the Chehalis, just anybody,
Yep.
just to make sure,
Yep.
like. they put
And then you
everybody-
get into this weird thing where they argue a little bit, or they dispute whose is what, because over time, maybe they shifted and one moved in and one moved out and I don't know all that stuff, but that's the level of scrutiny. So people at DAHP are kind of the holders of that executive order 050405 and that elevated their agency up to kind of a higher status because now everybody kind of asks them,
Sure.
what do you think?
They have secret maps, seriously, of all the archaeological sites and everything that have been discovered.
And
from
I'm not
the
kidding, like,
knowledge
I
of-
couldn't have a conversation with those guys without them saying, well, 0505 says, I'm like, come on,
And
man.
those secret maps are because they wanna know where it is, but they don't want,
But they don't want
Yeah,
everyone.
That's right,
They don't want
yeah,
anybody.
he's not joking
Yeah.
about
Those
the
are-
secret map,
Yeah.
it's
Sure.
legitimate,
Yeah.
like, there are literally times where you can't, they won't let you see it.
right,
So they have these easy forms that you fill out for projects and basically similar to what you would hand the tribe, you write up a description, provide some maps about what you're gonna do, an explanation, and they kind of make a determination about, based on whatever existing structures and the history of that site, if you're likely to disturb something or not. You might have to do something,
Sure.
but I've never actually had to do anything further than that, but
when they have the hidden map, so there's a chance they could even just go, yep, nope, that's not gonna work, and you're like,
yeah.
okay.
Alright, so a DAHP briefing on historic preservation and particularly with reference to like town districts, cause that's mostly what you've got here with this historic district downtown. The outlying areas, while the houses were, a lot of them were built in the same time, are probably not going to individually qualify, or the owner wouldn't ask for them to be individually qualified, at least at this point, but you never know, you might have a renaissance, if you portions of Olympia, like all the South Capitol neighborhood, above the Capitol,
Oh,
that's
yeah.
all designated, and those people have taken the district designation and then they've turned it into, I want a plaque on the side of my house
Sure.
that says,
This was
John
Judge
Wayne's
so-and-so's
or
house,
whatever.
right, yeah.
Yeah, and, or, this was the first territorial governor, I used to live next to a house that, the first territorial governor house, so, Governor Stevens'
Okay, yeah.
house. So, that's the thing, and I don't know what Tenino's stories are, but I'm sure all of these, historic.
We have a
around town.
historic preservation officer, or whatever, I don't know, what's his title? Town historian.
You do?
Yes.
We should get him
Yeah.
to come in and
Yeah.
he probably knows more than anybody. He just wrote a book. I'm sure you'd be happy.
Who's that?
Who's our town historian?
Rich Edwards.
Yeah.
Is he squared away on like DAHP 0505 stuff, or is he more just,
He's a research historian,
okay?
so he may be familiar with that, but really, he's really into,
Might be worth an ask.
he's into history writ large.
Is he, what role does he have with the museum?
He's on their board of directors, and he wrote a book on the naming of Tenino.
Yeah.
I mean, he's written half a dozen books.
So what do you want to do? You want to ask like Grant Griffin or Allison Brooks from DAHP to come over and do a brief, or do you want to hear from Rich Edwards? Or someone with local?
He's not a technical historian.
Allison.
Okay,
Allison's the director, right?
yeah, she might not come out, but
Who's the other?
Yes,
Grant Griffin is the There's a couple, like, there's, Michael Hauser is like their historian, but you want kind of a practitioner who's gonna say,
Yeah,
when
What happens
we
if we wanna do
see
something?
requests for designations, this is what we see.
Yeah.
Or we have good data that says towns that preserve their districts and plus them up and make them look nice, see exponential, growth in businesses or
yeah,
tourism
that's
or
what we want.
whatever.
Yeah, as much as I would love to hear from Rich, I think
Yeah,
for what
he's not gonna be
we,
able to do that.
yeah, for what we
Yeah,
need to
okay.
do, we're looking for,
Okay.
He could give us a Tenino history lesson.
Yeah, that should be fun.
I guess we could get that elsewhere.
So to answer your question on county and tribal issues, I think that what we talked about is the limit of probably Tenino's role.
perfect, okay, yeah,
On the tribe side.
makes sense.
So, are you thinking that for January then, or?
Let's do this, why don't you identify things through here that you wanna talk about, and I'll try to figure out a schedule for us, cause some of these, like TRPC and DAHP discussion on historic preservation, maybe scheduling, I don't wanna lock them into December if they're,
Yeah,
if
that
they
makes
got
sense.
other plans.
What's infill development?
Infill is that kind of, it's
This is
house,
middle.
house, vacant lot, house. So that vacant lot that's sitting out there in the block, that's
It-
vacant for whatever reason, infill would be.
Putting
a new
something
lot,
there.
A new house on there.
Okay, so we have quite a few
Oh, yeah.
randomly.
Right, so like the thing that Will was talking about earlier with, hey, that, partially the Park Avenue site, at Reynolds that has, looks like it's nothing, but it's actually a city street, that's infill. So infill is any vacant lots inside the city that are already platted, that you're just kinda waiting for it to turn.
Waiting for it to develop.
Right,
Okay.
or a mobile home or a single wide sitting on something that you could pull out and drop a duplex in, that would be considered infill.
Okay, infill,
But
cool.
building-
Infill wouldn't be.
But the accessory,
That's a
But that-
sort
that
of
would
an
be
infill,
infill
yeah,
as
that's a
well,
sort, I mean, I think you're getting more density in there, that's
yeah,
fine.
anything that's more
Infill wouldn't
density.
be taking a small, single-family home, demoing it and building a new big single-family home, that's not infill.
So would infill be, would that also have to do with commercial?
You could
Or is it primarily
probably
residential?
figure that, something like that out, I mean, that's about, yes, because if you're taking, infill's like the opposite of sprawl, right? Sprawl is what GMA was
Yeah.
intended to, have you heard of
That's
sprawl
pretty good.
before?
Yeah, and that would just, people just
Yeah.
keep
it's like-
developing out and out.
Yeah, it's like, exactly, where it's accelerated development on the fringes, cause the land's cheap.
Yeah,
And then.
it's what you see in like Arizona and stuff where they
And
just,
all of Southern California sprawl, Spokane's got a lot of sprawl, Colorado Springs like the king of sprawl. I mean, so it's conversion, and in Washington and Oregon, and this is back to GMA, kind of where, how this all came from, is Washington and Oregon had, resource lands that they didn't wanna get turned into subdivisions, so they passed what they call growth management. So they said, and especially in Oregon, they say, our agricultural lands are precious to us, and you can't turn them into housing and subdivisions. We're gonna keep them as fertile Willamette Valley soils.
Okay.
Because once you pave those over and have a building on top of them, they're not gonna work anymore. You can't pull that out and expect to plant cabbages and have them grow.
right, okay,
So we're gonna draw lines around our communities and say, cities here, farms there, right? Or cities here and gravel mines over there, because all that stuff's important to us. And so sprawl is kind of the leapfrogging of development that ends up having, an arterial road, 4 miles out there with no sidewalks, and the only way you can get to anything is to drive. I mean, that's kind of all the car-dependent culture. So
Okay.
infill is saying, hey, our gridded communities here, let's start building homes inside our community that already has sewer, already has water, already has a sidewalk, already has bus service, all these other things, because it's just financially more efficient than building out into the infill.
sure,
So like, Hidden Meadows, that's not infill.
that's sprawl. Well,
That would be considered like sprawl,
yeah,
right?
okay,
Because they're platting, brand new raw land, kicking a, single, well, it's a 2-lane, but it's a driveway really for the 25 units or whatever. No one else is gonna use those unless they're accessing those 25 units. It's got a cul-de-sac at the end of it.
Is that, does it? There's not, I thought the road's still built.
Does it push this through?
I don't know if it ever will, but.
Right. So so you get those, and you get these little, like these little cul-de-sac developments, you kinda get like a, Johnson Court here, and, Davis Tree Lane Court over here, and all these courts everywhere, and so everyone has to hop in their car to get anywhere else.
Sure.
So infill tries to take advantage of the whatever raw land or available density inside the city. But the downside of infill is it's expensive because you're having to work within the, the three-dimensional space that you've been given. Because you've got sewer lines running this way, like fiber optic cable going the other way, maybe a sidewalk and all that. You can't just like doze it and start like
Right.
we do out here at, like Hidden Meadows. There's no
It's like a blank slate
utilities, there's no,
for you.
They set it up how they want, right?
so that it's easy for the developer. But, soapbox moment, it's more expensive for the city to serve,
Yeah,
right?
because all the service
Because
kind of
now-
run out there.
If I get a call from the police department, they gotta drive 5 minutes out there.
Sure.
Right, and if you have enough of those, and now 5 minutes over there, and then 20 minutes back to the other side of town, and, and you're running all over to hit all these big developments,